You've worked together before, right, in television, but this is your first feature film together, and perhaps your first feature film as well. Like, can you tell us how it came about and why you wanted to go on this journey together?
Shall I answer that?
Yes.
Yes, of course. Yeah, I'll start. Yeah, I guess it's kind of rooted in passion, really, a passion for horror films. I used to watch horror films as a kid. Probably inappropriate for somebody so young, but there you go, and loved them, and then a passion for kind of wanting to tell a story about contemporary Wales to an international audience, and that's where kind of those two passions sort of aligned, really. And then it struck us actually when we were discussing it with Roger that horror was great. Was a great medium, great prism through which to tell this sort of Welsh story to an international audience, because there is such a massive audience worldwide for horror. You know, we love it, don't we? So that was perfect, really.
Yeah. We first met when I was the writer on a TV show that Lee was an actor in, and we used to talk back then about wanting to produce and make work, and started to make work together for TV. But there was always this ambition about the big screen, because there are so few Welsh language feature films that get made. We like a challenge, so we had that ambition really that we wanted to bring a Welsh language film to the big screen, and it took us a long time to get there. But that was always on our bucket list, really, of things to do as creative people and producers.
I must feel amazing that you've got there. And Annes, how did you get involved in the project? Did you get a script? Did you know these guys beforehand?
I did know Lee, and we were at a BAFTA Cymru event, and Lee came up to me in the bar by the chocolate station and told me that he had a script that he wanted me to look at and that it was a horror. And I really wanted to work with Lee, but I didn't particularly want to do a horror until I got the script. And the script wasn't like the image in my head of whatever I'd expected. It was so bizarre in all the various things that happened throughout the script, and with Cadi's character, the things that she does, but also the fact that she's there all the time and barely says anything. So even before I really had figured out who Cadi was or what she'd appear like, I knew that it would be so much fun to unravel that whole journey. So I was desperate to play it and felt so lucky that Lee had asked me to. So I'm sure I accepted as soon as I was given it, really.
Phew.
Amazing. So there's a word I keep hearing a lot being battered around in reviews of the film, and that's visceral. People are really responding particularly to the sound design and the sort of the visuals, everything from, I feel like right from the beginning when you have the sort of the face mask peeling off and all these like little details. Is that something you were hoping people would pick up on? And what were your influences behind sort of creating that something you can a really tangible feeling to unsettle everyone?
Yeah, I mean, that obviously was the intention. I think I wanted to tell a story, not just in a kind of a literal way, with my background in directing television. I think television's like candy floss, really. You're telling a very literal story, and I've been swimming in this kind of soup of naturalism in many ways. And this was the perfect opportunity, a horror, to kind of stimulate not just the mind, because of course there are several strands actually to the story, to do with its sort of socio-political commentary. It's singularly Welsh in what it talks about, but also universal in terms of the themes of environmentalism. But also, I kind of wanted to tell a story in a visceral, in a sensory kind of way as well. So absolutely, that was the intention. Yes.
Yeah, and can you tell us about the house, because it's a real home, right? And it's in Powys in Wales. How did you go on a search for a house? How did you find it?
Yeah, Roger and I have done a short previously, and it was set in this sort of modern house. And when we were discussing this, we were kind of going, you know what, we really want to subvert the cliche of what a Welsh horror film would look like, stone cottage, wind, rain in the winter. And so we were like, let's set it in a contemporary house, designed. And so the script came, and I just thought, oh, you know what, I'll just Google contemporary designed houses in Wales, as you do. And then suddenly a few popped up. And then there was this house that just stood out, which was sort of designed by the English architect John Pawson. As you see, it's sort of made of it has this kind of an interesting fusion of almost sort of Japanese kind of a feel to it in terms of its stripped back Zen quality, and also European in its design aspects. And I just thought, this is interesting. So Roger and I went on a little tour to Mid Wales, and we saw this house, and I was like, this is it. We have to shoot here. And then what happened was that we almost treated it like a site-specific piece of theatre, actually. And that's sort of in our background, both of us. And we wrote several of the locations into the script.
So I was going to ask about that, actually, Roger. So how did that work so you obviously had your script and you find the house, but how did you start staging it together?
Well, in terms of the resources we had to make the film, we wanted to get value for money, I guess, and see the value on screen. So in the writing process, it was very much, we're going to be pretty much in one location. But the way that we work together as well, I'm not precious about the script. It is something which evolves when other people start to get involved, and it's more of a collaborative approach. So we went to visit the house, and it was right, we need to adapt the script to fit the house. And there's certain parts of the house, like the isolation cell, where people
ask about, is that really a meditation room? Really? Wow.
I mean the whole house, it's called T Bywyd, which means life house,
ironically.
And people go there to meditate. You can hire this place, and you can go and you can be at one with nature, and you can go and sit in the isolation room, open the roof and let all the elements, let the snow and the rain come in, and sit there and look at the stars and think on life. So as soon as we were walking down that corridor, and it was on a changeover day, wasn't it? So
was, yes.
there were only certain times of the week that we could get in to look at it, because they'd say, right, they're there. It's like an Airbnb, I guess. They're changing the beds. They're checking nobody's stolen all the forks between 9 and 12 on a Tuesday. And we went, and they were really welcoming, and we went in and led us down the corridor. And the woman who was showing us the place said, wait till you see this. And she opened the doors, and she showed us this isolation room. And Lee said to me under his breath as we walked out of there, you've got to write this in.
Yeah, because it's the perfect metaphor for the family. I mean, the house is a bunker in the landscape. It's a hermetically sealed box. And it's brutal, and it's austere, and it's just like the relationships of the characters in the piece, of the types in the film. So, yeah, it just seems perfect, doesn't it?
Amazing, and potentially an Airbnb if anyone wants to take that trip. So, Annes, I feel like you have the absolute best, most fun part in this film, and you get to do a lot of, eating maggots off legs and hands in mouths, pulling things out. What was the sort of most challenging or the most fun out of those sort of little stunty moments to do?
I think playing Cadi was just endless fun, because you kind of got to behave in a way that you just would not get away with in day-to-day life, regardless of all of those extreme moments. Just the fact that I was allowed to just look at someone for as long as I wanted to look at them until I moved on, got bored of looking at that one person, started looking at the wall instead. I got to behave like a toddler does, and as soon as a toddler grows up a bit, you start telling, don't do that, it's rude, smile, be friendly. Cadi doesn't have to do any of those things. She can just behave like a little animal. But definitely licking the leg, just licking such a hairy leg, covered in sweet, sugary blood, with maggots being stuck all over my face, is something I won't forget and probably won't be doing again.
Were they real maggots? They were.
I can't quite... There was definitely fake ones. There may have been a handful of real ones. I don't know. I don't want to know.
Oh, wow.
It's interesting. I've been asked this question, or something similar to this, quite a lot, actually. You know, what was behind the decision to film it in Welsh? And actually, it wasn't a decision. Do you know what I mean? I mean, we all speak Welsh. It's our sort of our mode of everyday expression. Actually, I probably live my life 60%, 70% in Welsh. So it's about who we are, I think. Rather than being a decision. You know, the Welsh language is it's part of the, and by extension, the Welsh culture is part of the DNA of the piece, you know. We definitely reference within the film the tales of the Mabinogi, and specifically probably the story of Blodeuwedd. It's Welsh through and through in a way. And did I worry about that? In terms of trying to get this over to an international audience? A little bit, but I kind of remembered something that I read when I was a student back in the day, a Brechtian statement, which was something like, and I'm paraphrasing here, in order to be universal, you need to be local first. And there's a cultural specificity, I think, to this film that hopefully kind of appeals to international audiences, because we are living in a world that is increasingly homogenized and global. And I think in that kind of world, we're searching for those little things that make life special. Do you know what I mean? So I had a theory that it would sell. Let's hope it, you know, it's done pretty well thus far, but let's hope it does as well as it's done elsewhere in the UK.
I know who Cadi is, because I think that when you're setting out on the journey to write something like this, you need to know. But the ambiguity that you speak to, I think, is something that we deliberately wanted to create, because going on this journey to create our first feature, we also went on a journey of understanding or trying to identify what cinematic means to us. And one of the things that I certainly take cinematic to mean is the relationship of the viewer to the screen and what they're seeing, and actually allowing there to be gaps and allowing there to be spaces for people to put their own definition on it and kind of fill in those blanks, really. So to answer your question, you know, absolutely, I know who Cadi is.
But I was never told what your idea of her was. Yeah. So I got to decide what my version was, and I don't know whether it was really what you'd intended. Yeah.
But I think absolutely it's sort of like I needed to know, and Annes needed to define it for herself. And I'm sure there are, many versions of definition of who Cadi is and where she's come from in this room tonight. And I think that's a really good thing.
Yeah, in many ways, for me, and this is what I loved. It's sort of when the script kind of appeared and out of our conversations. For me, it's a kind of in its simplest form. It's a morality tale. It's about the importance of being true to yourself and your people, and also tells a kind of a stark, universal kind of warning about the consequences of greed and avarice. But also, there's that environmental message that is part of the piece, and in the bloody conclusion of it kind of suggests that the planet will sooner or later kind of get revenge on us for what we're doing to it. So I think for me, I'm happy for it to speak on any level, actually, to an audience, and I think that's the strength of it. I mean, Roger's already touched upon it, but what the kind of film that I really love is that kind of film that gives you the space to interpret. I mentioned already my theatre background, and what I love about theatre is the fact that the audience is involved in a dialectical relationship of meaning with what's on stage. And I think, having done a bit of television, which is sort of canterfloss, as I've said already, what I love about cinema is that it's kind of in your it's in your imaginations, you know, and I love it when people come to me and say, this is what I read in it. And I say, well, that wasn't intended, but actually, I love your interpretation. So carry on with that, you know. So, yeah, as long as people come and see it, I don't mind what they think.
Well, I think for me, it's something to do with the primal. I think a lot of the really good folk horror films, they touch on something which is to do with in a very sort of existential way how we will continue to live, and whether we will continue to live. And I think a lot of the best folk horrors, they're in that world, and that's what we find frightening about them. You know, is that sense of our existence, the existence of our community, the existence of our people is under threat. I don't think, if we're truthful, we weren't going into this thinking that we were making a folk horror. I think, you know, to be completely frank, there wasn't something that we were necessarily completely aware of. That we've talked a lot about influences when we've been talking about the film and how it's fed by all sorts of stuff that we were exposed to as we were growing up, whether it be film or stuff on TV, or, as Leah said, the stories of the Mabinogi. But what was interesting is that as we were crafting the film and showing it to people, those folk horror themes were percolating through.
And there's a really strong folk horror tradition, albeit not in the cinema, but definitely in our literature. Actually, we talk of the Mabinogi, but also, you know, you think of somebody like Arthur Machen, who has inspired some of the biggest and best horror writers. You know, I think it's sort of, as I said earlier in response to the first question, it's sort of in our DNA. And I mean, Roger's sort of letting you in on some, you know, dark secret that we didn't really know what we were doing. But it's probably true. But I think it's about, often with influences, I think you have to kind of set them aside and see what bubbles up from the subconscious. And I think in many ways this film has bubbled up from all of our subconsciouses. Do you know what I mean? I think.
Yes, absolutely. You know, we as bilingual people, we have a choice really whether we want to make our work in English or make our work in Welsh. And there was no question with this film. We knew that we wanted to make a Welsh language film. And then it is like a political act, I think, yeah. Because we've decided, right, we're going to make this film in this language, but we are determined that we are going to take it to as wide an audience as possible. And for us, we very much thought of it as the ambition was to make a contemporary European film. That's what we wanted to do. So the film doesn't refer to the language. You don't see on the screen the word Wales or Welsh mentioned, but the language is essential to the way in which the dialogue is written. So not only is it made in Welsh, but it was written in Welsh. And the fact that, you know, this film premiered at South by Southwest, for example, for us was a dream come true, because we thought, well, actually, even though this is the first Welsh film to appear in cinemas for nearly 5 years, it's up there with titles from every corner of the world. And that's what our ambition has to be moving forward, really, that, you know, we are able to compete with the best of what's out there.
Yeah, as Roger said, it is a political act in many ways, you know, and I guess in many ways this film was born of frustration for me, because there are 600,000 of us who speak Welsh in Wales, and there are probably just over 1 million who speak Welsh elsewhere in the rest of the world. And yet, we do not have a film industry to speak of. You know, in the last 8 or 10 years, we've made 3 films. This is probably the only one that's had a kind of a UK-wide release, thanks to Picture House, of course. And I guess my ambition with this film was to kind of to define a singularly Welsh kind of cinematic aesthetic in a way, which is really arrogant actually, and political and all the rest of it. But I just wanted to create something that was distinctive and Welsh, and could compete, as Roger said, on the world stage. And here we are.
And Lee also has made the point a number of times to me. He's kind of pointed out that you can go to a country like Iceland, for example, which is a population of
350,000.
350,000. And people in this room could probably name a number of great Icelandic films that have been out in the last 5 years. And yet it's curious to us that our culture hasn't generated the same number of titles.
And definitely for me, part of the appeal of the script was that it was only in Welsh. And it wasn't just a really unusual script to read in Welsh, but also in general. And the fact that I could do that in Welsh was so nice, because I don't create my own work. So I'll get the script through and it'll either be in English, or if I'm filming something in Wales, it'll generally be Welsh. And then there'll be an English translation, which will sell outside of Wales. And it was so nice for me that for once you could just do it in Welsh, because other things that we film twice are still set in Wales and might be set in Blaenau Ffestiniog, and it'll still be filmed in English. And I've just always found that really contradictory, but obviously as an actress, I need to work and I want to work and I love acting so much, and so I'll do them and I love doing them, but I'd much rather do them truthfully and do them in Welsh and do some project in Welsh and do separate things in English, because it makes sense for that story. And so for this story, it would have been bizarre to do a story about heritage and about culture and about being true to yourself, and doing it in English would have been very strange.
I just want to say congratulations once again. If everyone enjoyed the film, please tell everyone about it. It's coming out across the UK on Friday, released by Picture House and supported by the BFI. So please do spread the word. But for now, thank you so much, Diolch yn fawr, the creatives behind the feast.